So thank you, Jay, for inviting me. And I'm sitting, and I have I don't have people to thank for the fact I'm sitting. I have only myself to thank for the fact that so I twisted my ankle yesterday, but I really have to thank Rita and Chloe and Michelle, who brought crutches, and then there was a bandage this morning, so thank you all. It's amazing to be back. So the last time I was back here was for a Fed trip for my advisor, Tom Troutman, and this feels like, an equally auspicious and celebratory moment, so it's really great. Initially, I didn't think I had a single answer to the question that frames this panel. What do I wish I had known when I was in graduate school? But I think I have a provisional answer, and in some ways, I think the panels have spoken to this. I wish I had known that I could and would change careers, that you don't do one thing for all of your life necessarily. And I think there's a way, and I'm not really sure why, that graduate training and even academia has a kind of infantilizing effect where you don't feel you have any power over things, or you can't make decisions yourself. And so part of, as I talk today about my career changes, is partially to actually emphasize those moments for me that were truly intentional. Some of it was serendipity, but some of it was truly intentional. So my presentation is going to trace my journey from one job as a faculty member in a liberal arts college at Carleton in Minnesota to my current role, which is a senior associate director at Stanford. And I'll just say a few things about this second role because it's perhaps less obvious what it is. So part of my role is basically working on the first year requirement. And every 10 years or so, Stanford changes its first year requirement, which means you go through a very long process of figuring out courses, of working with faculty about who will teach courses. This particular requirement also has a postdoctoral fellowship program. So the themes that we've been talking about today is something I think about a lot in my professional career because I mentor a lot of PhDs, half in the humanities and half in the natural sciences and other STEM fields. All right, so when I started at Carleton, I really had no idea what a liberal arts college was. I had gone to Berkeley, then I came to Michigan, and there's no good excuse. I think it's willful ignorance because I went to graduate school with many people who went to liberal arts colleges. In fact, what I found at the liberal arts colleges is there are lots of kids of faculty at liberal arts colleges. But the reason this matters is that, and this may be less true now, but when I was here, trying to finish quickly was inversely related to the ability to get teaching experience. So I had very limited teaching experience. It allowed me to do everything fairly quickly, but it meant when I ended up in a position where I was expected to teach, I really did not know what I was doing. And I do want to emphasize this in part because it's okay. These are not all stories of triumphs. These are also stories of moments you fail and flail. And that was definitely what it was like for me. And at a teaching institution, to try to say to someone, I don't really know how to teach, is a very difficult thing to figure out how to ask. I think now at most institutions, centers for teaching and learning are much more visible. It's much more accepted that you actually have to teach faculty how to teach, even if what you're hiring them to do is teach. But at that time, at least, it was not so obvious. What I did figure out, and I would encourage this, I don't think people do this enough, I actually started visiting other people's classes. I watched how some of my colleagues, people in other departments, people in my own department, how they taught. And for me, this was really helpful, not only because it gave me some sense of things I could be doing, but I think it gave me a better sense of what I could not do. That is, it gave me a better sense of who my teaching persona is. And this is sort of connected to this question of what I wish I knew. I read a lot of teaching statements. We have about 300 people apply to our fellowship, so this is a genre I know very well. And among the materials people get, routinely it's the worst one. It is flat. It tends to be the ones framed with the most, I believe in critical thinking, my passion for blah, blah, I'm sorry. But really, very happy metaphors. And partially I think it's, well, one is a kind of rookie mistake, which is that people think you're being hired to teach content. You're being hired to teach students. Like, think about that person you're teaching, right? What is that student like? That student at that institution, that student who you want to reach? How have you reached students? I think these are better ways to pose the question to yourself as you're trying to figure out how you talk about teaching, is to talk about it as a kind of human activity that involves other human beings. Obvious. Surprisingly not so. The second thing I did a lot at Carleton, even though I think that often one is told not to do it, which is I actually got really involved in administration. I got involved in a lot of different kinds of faculty administration. And partially first it started at the department, but then I served on a college-wide curriculum committee and a faculty affairs committee. Doing this was very helpful for the kind of next transition I made, which is an administrative transition, but it was also helpful because it made me understand how the college worked, where the centers of power was, who were some of the decision makers, what it meant or how you assess whether or not a certain department should have a minor. These are questions that had never occurred to me really as a graduate student. And often when you're in a department, it's equally opaque, I think. And so serving on college level committees for me was hugely helpful as a faculty member, and then, and this is I'm going to talk a little bit about now, and then in the next career change I made, which is actually into academic administration. The choice to, I really love my job, and I actually really love Minnesota. I don't want to bag on the Midwest at all. But I wanted, for very personal reasons, to move, to get closer to my family and to the West Coast. And it's very hard to move, as I don't need to tell any of you, as a faculty member. And so I was trying to figure out what were, sometimes the word, I don't know if this is okay to use, basically academic adjacent jobs. So these are, I was looking at higher ed jobs. And the first, so I have a few pieces of advice for people who are considering this. The first is to get a sense of what you like doing. There are different types of administrative jobs, and they're quite distinct. Do you like student services? So these are jobs that are often advising in residential, in kind of res ed. They are sometimes community center positions. They look a certain way. Do you like teaching and learning? Increasingly, there are more jobs in centers for teaching and learning, but also embedded jobs. So, for instance, from our fellowship program, a couple of people have gotten teaching line jobs where half of their job is teaching, and then half of it is really working on things like if there are major introductory courses, working with other faculty on those, or the major. So these are also, I think, actually a kind of growing field within academic administration. And then finally, the kind of position I ended up with, because this is what I really wanted to do, which was academic programming. So this is running of centers, often research centers or area study centers, but also, in my case, an undergraduate curricular center. So I think the fact that I had worked at a liberal arts college, that I understood something about the culture of undergraduates, I think was very appealing to an institution like Stanford, which is so graduate heavy, actually, that they really wanted someone to be able to speak to the kind of what an undergraduate curriculum might look like. Secondly, do research. So this is, I mean, this is kind of an obvious thing to say, but to look for these jobs, not just to get a sense of what's out there, but actually to get a sense of the language people use. I think in an earlier panel, somebody used the word stakeholder, maybe it was Jamie. So I had never heard this word before, or I never used this word before, but suddenly when I was applying, I would say, oh, well, the stakeholders in this decision, blah, 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 blah. So it just means the people who have a stake, right? That's literally what it means. And yet using that language, which I only realized because I read all these ads, and I started to get a sense of what that world looked like, right? What made sense, what was translatable. That's kind of how I figured it out. Importance of networks, I don't need to emphasize this, but I will say that I don't think this is just true of academic institutions, but it is true of academic institutions. They're quite conservative. They like people who know their institution best. And so if you have no connection to the institution, I have no connection to Stanford, then it's very helpful if you know someone at that institution who can say something about you. If nothing else, at least for that first read, because I think that's actually quite important in educational institutions. And then narrative has come up. have a story about why you want to do this job. There is a lot of skepticism bordering on suspicion of why PhDs choose to apply for academic administrative jobs, that they also see it as a second choice, that they will really be kind of bitter, or they're really seeing it as a kind of backdoor into the faculty, right? So if this is something you want to do, you want to be able to have a story that's about a kind of proactive decision, a proactive choice that you've made because it speaks to something that you've done. And the last piece of advice I would give is about, and this is actually, I think, very much something Rebecca was saying, about the importance of experience. So we're in an institution of higher ed, so we think degrees are the things that matter most. But when you are actually applying for jobs, what I have realized, what I have found is that for many of the people on our job committees, for example, the person in HR, she will routinely say, well, this person has no experience. Because for her, what matters in a job is that you be able to say that I've had experience, if not doing that job, doing something where you can make a kind of credible argument about what's similar. And so even for me, when I was interviewing for the job at Stanford, the associate vice provost at the time was a faculty member. He was maybe the most skeptical about my application. And so he said, well, all of the administrative experience has been as a faculty member, but why, this also requires being very detail-oriented and having very good organizational skills. He was a faculty member, so I don't know. But in any case, so he asked me about that, and I was like, oh my gosh. But then I remembered that when I was a grad student here, for about a year and a half, I worked with a organization called SOS Community Services. It still exists in Ypsilanti. And for them, I had done a lot of the work around, I put together a donor database, I had done a bunch of events, so I could speak to him about this work that I did when I was not a faculty administrator, but that needed those kinds of organizational kinds of skills that for him, I don't know, it seemed to satisfy him as an answer, so I think that was good. I just want to, with my time remaining, say a little bit about what it's like to have an administrative job, for those of you who are considering it. So the first thing I would say is that one of the things I really had to learn is that in the world of office culture, relationships really matter. And what I mean by that is, as a faculty member, very often meetings were oriented around tasks. You have this decision to make or this thing to do. And so the interaction was very much driven by tasks. And that's initially, I think, how I approached a lot of my work. And then it soon became clear to me I should be going to lunch with my fellow colleagues, that we needed to develop relationships and know one another, and it made all the tasks much easier. I don't know why I don't even think of myself as so task-oriented, but actually the emphasis on relationships is very important in kind of maybe the rest of all other kinds of jobs. And maybe it would make faculty meetings a little better to put some energy into relationships. But the other thing, and I was asked this at lunch, is about whether or not I missed kind of being a faculty member, and I really do. I mean, the thing that I think I do miss is that I spent whatever proportion of my time, more of my time being able to talk about ideas, and less of my time having to think about operations. Having said that, one of the ways I thought about being an academic, or I think about being an academic administrator, is influence without authority. So you have very little authority, but one of the things you learn to do is steer conversations, is to ask faculty to think about, oh, are you sure that is an inclusive syllabus? Have you thought of that? Right? So you think about all kinds of diplomatic and gentle ways, many of which will, it won't be immediate, but might have some really positive effects down the road. And so I think learning to influence things over which you have no authority to make the final decision is helpful. And sometimes, for me at least, I have found that influence comes from ideas. right? You're still working with faculty. So to make an argument about a set of ideas about why this matters is actually something that carries quite a bit of weight, and I don't want to underestimate that. And that it is working and knowing kind of something about faculty culture that can, I think, make you, both enjoy your job, but also make you very effective as an administrator, because you understand something about what makes people go to graduate school and what makes them study, and why the creation of knowledge matters and is important, which I really do, I believe. I don't have time to teach, so instead for me, it's really been about trying to think about research projects that don't involve archival research, because that's not really something I can do. So things that are more contained, it is possible. It means you have to sort of be more creative and think a little outside the box.